Meeting of Glendale City Council. May we have the roll call, please?
Council members Devine. Here. Friedman. Here. Najarian.
Here.
Weaver.
Here.
Mayor Sinanian.
Here. May we have the report, please?
The agenda for the October 7th, 2014 special public meeting of the City Council was posted on Thursday, October 2nd, 2014 on the bulletin board outside of City Hall.
What is next?
Items 1, Director of Public Works regarding pedestrian safety improvements. 1A, motion to note and file report.
Yes.
Mayor Sinanian, members of the City Council, good afternoon to everybody.
Good afternoon.
I'd like to introduce to all of you Rubik Golanian, our Director of Public Works, who will take you through a report that we've basically put together as it relates to some statistical information on pedestrian safety and improvements that we have made within the community, as well as an overview, basically, of the Pedestrian Safety Task Force that was put together a year ago, outlining some of the engineering, enforcement, and educational items that we have already done, as well as give you a current status of the actions taken by the city. We also have Chief Castro in the audience, as well as our Director of Communications, Tom Lorenz, and staff available to be able to answer any questions as they may come up. So with that, I'd like to ask Mr. Golanian to take you through the report, sir.
Thank you, Ms. Beers. Good afternoon, Mr. Mayor, members of the City Council. As stated, this presentation is on the much-anticipated report of recommendations on pedestrian safety improvements that we have been working on for the last few months. As a way of background, although Glendale is not unique in dealing with pedestrian and vehicular collisions in an urban setting, nonetheless, we have a grave concern about the number and severity of these accidents, especially the fatalities. This data compiled by our police department staff shows a nearly consistent level of accidents in the last 8 years, except for 2008, of course. So from 2005 to 2013, we've had 915 accidents, of which 35 were fatal. As you know, as recently as September 22nd, we experienced another fatal accident on our streets that brings the total this year to 5. These accidents appear to be concentrated in the downtown and west side neighborhoods. As you can see in this map, the areas with darker coloration indicate locations with high density of pedestrian collisions. For comparison purposes, again, the police department has compiled the data that you see on the slide. Essentially, for the years 2007 to 2011, we generally fare worse than Burbank, but better than Pasadena when it comes to strictly pedestrians killed by traffic collisions. For instance, in the lower table, in 2007, we were the 4th worst for population level, better than Pasadena, but worse than Burbank. With 52 cities compared, the highest would be the better ranking, so we were at 4, Pasadena was at 2, and Burbank was at 7. So, on October 28th, 2013, at your...
I'm sorry, can I ask a question about that?
Surely.
If that's the case, if we're better than Pasadena, how come we keep being told we're the worst in the state or worst in the country or all these things you hear?
Councilmember Friedman, I believe at least the most recent article that came out, it was very specific to State Farm, and they had their own unique set of... Allstate, I'm sorry. They have their own unique set of criteria for comparison, and it's not statewide or even nationally recognized as a comprehensive analysis.
Yes, go ahead, please.
So on October 28th, 2013, at your direction, we formed the Pedestrian Safety Task Force as a subcommittee to the Transportation and Parking Commission to diagnose the problem and generate recommendations for improvement. The 20 members of this inclusive committee consist of 2 TPC commissioners, 1 planning commissioner, staff from Public Works Maintenance Services and Traffic Engineering, Police Department, Public Information Office, Mobility and Transportation Planners, representatives from Walk by Glendale, Glendale Unified School District, Glendale City College, Transportation Management Association, Chamber of Commerce, Homeowners Coordinating Council, ANCA, Association of Adult Daycare Centers, and some concerned citizens. At this point, I'd like to express my personal gratitude for their commitment and the tremendous work they have done so far, starting January of this year. To date, we have had 5 meetings. In addition, on April 17th, we held 2 workshops, one for the community that 35 people attended, including some of you. The other more focused workshop was for the task force members that concluded with a walkability assessment. We basically walked around several streets in the downtown area to observe the behavior of all road users as well as the infrastructure conditions. I'd like to note that the workshops and a report of findings were made possible by the UC Berkeley Safe Transportation Research and Education Center and California Walks, whose representative is present here today. The very valuable input from these 2 workshops helped us to develop this report. Then on August 25th, we presented this report to the Transportation and Parking Commission and have incorporated their comments. The main areas of focus, as stated in the report, are engineering, enforcement, and education. I will now provide an overview of the entire report. We have attached to the staff report a more detailed listing of tasks, including teams, priority, and timeframes. The list of engineering recommendations include expanding the high visibility continental crosswalks. In the past, we have used continental crosswalks limited to the school zones. However, we plan to expand it to other areas as warranted instead of the ladder-shaped crosswalks that we have been using. Again, in the past, our policy was not to stripe controlled crosswalks, but the plan here is to establish a priority process based on volume of vehicles and or pedestrians or history of accidents for striping these types of crossings. The older standards were for the yield signs right at the edge of the crosswalks that blocked adjacent drivers' view of the pedestrians in the crosswalk. The new standards call for yield signs in advance, about 12 to 20 feet off the edge. This will prevent blocking of the view of the drivers when the pedestrians are already in the crosswalk. The goal is to establish a priority, again, based on volume, speed, to install bulb out or curb extensions to shorten crossing distances. This evening, a proposal for 4 new mid-block crossings and curb extensions on Harvard and Louise will be presented to you as part of the approval of a grant.
Sorry, I have a question about those. Are those going to also have landscaping and provide some relief for pedestrians in terms of shade, that sort of thing?
Yes, Council Member Friedman, they will have bioswales, including 99 new trees to be planted and landscaping.
Terrific. Thank you.
Leading intervals, these are where the walk sign would come on 5 seconds before the green ball for drivers. This will give the pedestrians a head start stepping off the curb. In this scenario, turn movements for vehicles are only allowed when the pedestrians are already in the crosswalk. We have already implemented this at the Glendale and Wilson intersection. Scramble crosswalks that Councilmember Devine had indicated before, these are crossings that permitted in diagonal directions. We have this type of crosswalks at Brandon and Harvard currently, and plan to expand it to other locations. A pilot program to use delineators to evaluate impacts and effectiveness of curb extensions before making concrete improvements. This approach has proven to work very well in downtown Los Angeles. The goal here is to develop a pedestrian safety action plan using the state of California standards. This would be a roadmap to identify, assess, and develop pedestrian safety policies and practices. New York, San Francisco, and other large cities have these plans in place. Hotspot improvements. This list identifies those intersections with the greatest number of pedestrian-involved accidents. Intersections are planned points of conflict in any roadway system, and hence it isn't surprising that a major part of addressing road safety challenges involves intersections. We plan on tackling pedestrian safety improvements at these locations programmatically. Enforcement recommendations. Digital speed feedback signs. We currently own 4 of these signs that show the speed of vehicles upon approaching. We believe it psychologically slows down drivers and works well where the installation of speed humps is infeasible.
I'm sorry, I have a question. Can we verify that? I mean, us feeling that way is one thing, but if we actually verify that it slows people down, have we done those studies where we radar people with and without them?
Yes, Council.
Before we spend a dime, we should do that.
Right. Councilmember Friedman, oftentimes when we get requests for speed humps and our studies don't warrant them, we install these digital speed radar signs, and we get the feedback from the residents that appears the drivers have slowed down, at least in the beginning.
You're talking about an expense for the city. Let's go out. It shouldn't be that difficult to actually do some random sampling in the same spot with and without the sign. Let's do that. I'd feel a lot more comfortable appropriating funds if I knew that this really worked. And right now, you're not convincing me.
Okay, absolutely.
So I think we should have that data.
Okay. Our police department also has mobile warning signs on trailers that can be deployed when requested. We're also recommending to create a frequently asked questions webpage and expand on My Glendale app for public to learn about enforcement policies and submit requests. This is to secure funding to support extra enforcement, especially at our hotspots. This would be similar to traffic school for moving violations and would be treated both as enforcement and education recommendation. We'd like to explore the feasibility of such administrative tickets for pedestrian safety violators and increase the reach of enforcement efforts through media. Our police department and PIO have already started both a traditional campaign with press releases as well as social media campaigns that we'll show examples of later on. As for education recommendations, again, we have already started developing educational materials, as you will see in the next slide, and the goal here is to build on and enhance this campaign for a unified brand with funding that we have recently secured. Hands-on education methods. This is a goal to expand our hands-on, in-person educational sessions that the police department has already started in different languages. We wanted to pick an area and try different intensive pedestrian safety education campaigns and replicate it citywide if successful. A recommendation here is to partner with local businesses such as the Galleria, Americana Brand, Brand Boulevard of Cars, to broadcast safety messages, whether in movie theaters, events in the parks, billboards, ads on buses, churches, local TV stations, and even more innovative measures like film and essay contests. There also is a pilot program that we'd like to implement for pedestrian flag programs. This essentially works with pedestrian crossing a crosswalk carrying brightly colored flags. These have been implemented in states of Washington and recently in Florida, and we have identified 2 locations for this pilot program already. As you can see, we haven't been waiting for the release of this report to implement some of these recommendations. Our current actions include the police department's 5 pedestrian and traffic safety sessions they have held so far. They have also developed educational materials for various audiences, as you can see in the slide. We also had a soft roll out at Cruise Night of a campaign that said who wore it best, and Mr. Lawrence will be able to elaborate on that if you like. We've also had several PSA, our GTV6 had several PSAs prepared that we are going to play one for you at this juncture.
Yes, honey.
Mommy, where is Grandpa?
I'm sure he'll be here soon. Time to blow out the candles.
But Grandpa's not here.
He'll be here soon. Let's go ahead and blow out the candles.
Hello, my name is Zara Sinanyan. I'm your mayor for the city of Glendale. My children, wife, and parents make me who I am. I can't imagine a moment without them. Have you taken the time to explain the importance of road safety to your family? Explain the importance of making eye contact with drivers before stepping onto the roadway, and always using a crosswalk. Glendale is one of the safest cities in the nation. Unfortunately, our seniors have become victim to fatal traffic accidents. Together, we can end these preventable fatalities. These are our elders. I need each of you to really ask yourselves, have you done enough to ensure your family is safe?
Thank you. So what else are we doing currently? We are working on the realignment of the skewed intersection of Glendale Avenue and Orange Grove Avenue. This will improve driver visibility and shorten pedestrian crossing distance. This was made possible by our existing grant from Surface Transportation Program local funds. We're also working on the installation of pedestrian-activated rectangular rapid flashing beacons. You can see the picture on the bottom of the slide. The plan is to install these as part of the currently under construction Glendale Avenue project. In the very near future, Pacific and Milford, Sonora and Grand Central, and other locations. We are designing the plans to signalize the intersection of Broadview and Kenwood Street. This was identified as part of the walkability assessment by the task force. This will enhance safety for pedestrians, and the fundings that we are going to use are current gas tax, Measure R, and STPL funds. As I stated earlier, we are in the process of converting our ladder crosswalks to continental crosswalks throughout the city, starting with the Glendale Avenue project. And this, as stated, will increase visibility of the pedestrians in the crosswalks. We'll be using TDA, Transportation Development Act, Safe Route to Schools, Measure R, and STPL funding. And as I indicated before, as part of the Glendale Avenue project and moving forward, we will stripe in advance line signs at uncontrolled crosswalks throughout the city. And this, again, will improve visibility. I'm happy to report on a more positive note that we have secured significant amounts of funding to help implement the recommendations of the pedestrian safety report as part of a very competitive 2014 Active Transportation Program grant. Staff was able to secure $1.5 million for pedestrian safety education, implementation of the action plan, and safety improvements. We were also able to secure $1.6 million through the same program for Safe Route to Schools, which would improve pedestrian and bicycle infrastructures along heavily traveled routes to Hoover Keppel Toll schools, Roosevelt, Glendale Christian School, Mann Elementary, the Community College, and the Muir Elementary School. In addition to that, we have been able to secure federal Safe Route to School grants and almost $1 million for improvements around the following schools: Chambly and Armenian, Valley View Elementary, Franklin Elementary, Thomas Edison Elementary, and Cerritos Elementary Schools. Moving forward, our next steps are going to be quarterly follow-up meetings with the task force to track progress, measure our progress, and implement the added recommendations that you just heard about, a programmatic implementation of all the recommendations, and if there are any roadblocks, to resolve them. One of the first steps is going to be to hire a consultant to develop the pedestrian safety action plan, and we will report back to the TPC as well as the City Council on a regular basis to indicate improvements in pedestrian safety. That concludes my presentation. Again, as Ms. Beer indicated, Chief Castro, Mr. Lorenz, and I are available to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you, Mr. Golanian. We have no question. I'm going to open public hearing and invite Tony Dang from California Walks.
They are all based on sound and current pedestrian safety research and best practices. Councilman Friedman, you're concerned about the speed radar feedback devices. They are proven effective. I can provide the studies to Rubik. I believe they have been shown to reduce speeds between 5 and 15%. So these are all sound recommendations, and I urge you to adopt them so that the city can get moving on improving pedestrian safety immediately. I also wanted to take a moment to thank Rubik as well as all the members of the task force for really taking the lead and spearheading this effort to improve pedestrian safety here in Glendale. As Rubik mentioned, being able to secure $1.5 million in this last round of active transportation program grant funding is huge. The program received over 700 applications totaling $1 billion in requests. So I think it just goes to show that with the city very committed to pedestrian safety, with the community members demanding pedestrian safety, that the city can secure more funding that can go towards projects like this. I also wanted to note that we have been having conversations with the State Office of Traffic Safety, and they've made some indications that they do want to include high visibility pedestrian safety enforcement actions as part of their future grant cycles, and I'm happy to pass that information along to Rubik and the police chief. But I would wholeheartedly urge the council to pursue that sort of grant funding as it comes online. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Dang. Yes, Ms. Friedman.
Well, first I want to thank Rubik and staff for the presentation. And clearly, traffic safety is a huge priority in the city. And people who are watching this need to understand that this is something that staff knows is a priority, our police department, our engineering department, planning. Everyone spends a lot of time thinking about this issue, which is such a huge challenge here in Glendale. So this is ongoing. It's work that continues. It's not something that we do once a year and then forget about. It's something that we evaluate and implement all year long, and we've been working on for a tremendous amount of time. So it's nice to have this breakdown of where we are and what new things that we're going to be seeing in the next year, couple of years, and also that we've been able to receive so much grant funding, which is great. I guess there are advantages to being in the press for having safety challenges like we do, because maybe it helps bring the grant funding. I'm not sure. So just a couple comments. First, a question. Did we evaluate roundabouts as part of our program? Is that something that the commission looked at or the task force looked at?
Mr. Mayor, Council Member Friedman, as part of the task force, we have not recently looked at roundabout. However, in the last couple of years, as part of Safe Route to Schools programs, we have identified locations that we are currently designing to install roundabouts or traffic circles, for lack of a better term.
I would like us to definitely keep taking a look at that and move forward. Certainly some of the roads that we have that are very, very wide and not even stop signed. I don't know what you call that. Not signalized. Is there a word for that?
Not controlled. Uncontrolled.
Uncontrolled. Thank you. So for uncontrolled streets, I'm thinking of just in my neighborhood, for instance, on Cumberland Road, there's a lot of uncontrolled intersections, very wide, and there's no sidewalks. So just as a way to slow traffic down without speed bumps, without stop signs. And I know that Royal Canyon has requested some roundabouts, and just something for us to look at. Certainly the cyclists, it's easier for cyclists because they don't have to start and stop. Now, just to go back to the education, have we talked to the schools about us going in to do one-day driver's ed, or them doing driver's ed with whoever used to do driver's ed and pedestrian safety? I'm told that they don't do driver's ed in schools anymore. And I know when I was in school, it was very effective when they would sit us down for an entire day and show us crash footage, which is what they used to do, and just scare everyone to the point where nobody wanted to get into a car with that 16-year-old guy anymore. So have we talked to them and reached out to them?
Council member.
I worry a lot about our kids. We just saw a horrible accident in Burbank. There was just a terrible accident in Irvine recently with high schoolers who were driving. So I assume that we'd be available if they're interested in us coming in. There's a lot of nodding. So I'll send this message out to the school board, and I've said this, I think I've said this every year. Please take that day. I know there's challenges with testing and their full agendas, but please, let's go in for a few hours at least and do driver's ed, do pedestrian safety, and I know Walk Bike Glendale has done some bicycle safety, but certainly for the drivers in particular and the young drivers, I think it's really important. Chief?
We do have a meeting coming up with the superintendent, Dr. Sheehan, to discuss our responses to school incidents as well as traffic, pedestrian safety around the schools, and an educational component. So
Great.
We have a scheduled meeting coming up soon to discuss additional efforts in partnership with the school. So that will be one of the things that we will be bringing forth. We have been doing some outreach now. We have been handing out some of the different things in the schools, some of our wristbands, some of the other lighted educational components.
Right.
So we have started some of that. Tomorrow I'll be walking with the kids, so that will be another thing that we will do with the other members of the department to try to get the word out. But we have set up actually some formal conversations to begin to improve our partnership with the schools.
Great, because I would love to see some form of driver's ed, even if it's just one day a year, come back into the schools. And, you know, I know we have such a challenge around the schools. I know that the schools are working closely with Safe Routes to Schools and trying to encourage more students to not have to drive to school and parents to drive. But certainly any conversation we can have to them about them thinking out of the box, whether it's not even allowing the parents to drop off right at the school anymore at peak times and making the kids walk a couple blocks or whatever it is. But, you know, we get complaints from people who live near the schools or have to drive near the schools, and how completely untenable it can be with all of the traffic when you get 700 parents all wanting to drop their kids off at school at the same time. So, you know, it's not just for safety of the students, but the schools have been causing major traffic jams in our neighborhoods. And so I know they take it seriously, but if we can help them to where, you know, the problem that's been created with the magnet schools and everything else with all of these kids driving, there's got to be ways of mitigating that. So hopefully we can work with them on that. Thank you. And then lastly, in terms of our education programs, our PSA and all of that, kind of the same message, and I'm glad to hear that there's data on those flashy speeding signs. But with the PSAs in particular in our education campaign, you know, it's so hard to have educational campaigns to change behavior. People have tried it with cigarettes for years. They've tried it with traffic for years. It's a really difficult thing. And I just, you know, not to rain on anyone's parade, but I just don't know that a PSA that says be careful is really being watched, really being absorbed, really selling the message to anyone. And I hate to see us spending time and money with an ad that may be ignored. I think if we're going to really venture into the area of trying to change ingrained behavior, you're either going to do it and do it seriously or don't do it at all. I just don't know if this is really going to, you know, showing this in a movie theater, is anybody going to watch it? Is it really eye-catching enough? Is the message really the right message? Is it getting to the right people? Running it on the internet, you know, the people that you're aiming at, the elderly guy in the ad, does this guy watch the internet? You know, go on the internet, and where would he even find it? I think if we're going to do that, you hire a professional advertising agency and you do it, and maybe someone will do it pro bono and help us out. Maybe we can get, you know, some ad agency to take this on. We certainly have a lot of them in the, you know, people who live in Glendale who are professional advertising people. But I have to say, as well-intentioned as our effort is and as good as it is, I just don't see that being something that's going to change any behavior. I just don't. And I'm just being frank, because we're spending time doing it, and we're talking about now trying to put it in movie theaters and launch it, and I just don't think you launch that ad. It just
So let me bring us back into focus. A lot of people that were victims of these accidents, a lot of the fatalities, and when I say a lot, we're talking about 80 to 90%, are elderly. It's a fact, statistical fact, and probably 80 to 90% of the victims are also Armenian American, also a statistical fact. I would never even consider doing the PSA unless it was calculated to reach a very specific demographic, which was identified by our police department as the main target of the PSAs, and the PSA was done with that very purpose. It was meant to be advertised on Armenian television, on the media, on the sources of media, which is proven time and again to be the most productive in terms of reaching the target audience. And I believe that's why it was done. I'll leave it up to the police department as to, if they want to add to anything to that. But this is exactly, schools, I'm very concerned about children. God knows I have 4 kids, 2 of them go to school, and 2 of them go to Keppel, which has an atrocious traffic drop-off and pick-up arrangement, because there are 3 schools converging on each other. Obviously, those 3 schools were built at a time when Glendale didn't have the population that it did. But again, in using and allocating our resources, we have to be conscious of who the victims are, what the problem is, and that's how the resources are being allocated right now.
Well, yeah, there's a lot of people that have to be reached. Certainly the elderly pedestrians that are unfortunately a lot of the time the victims, but also the people that are driving and maybe not paying enough attention, maybe texting and all of that. All I'm saying is that if you're going to devote any resources towards anything in this program, we need to have metrics and make sure that it's working. And with advertising, it's an art and it's done a certain way. And we may love our PSA, we may not. We may run it and hope that it does well, but we need to have some way of knowing whether or not that's true. And I don't know, I don't know how we measure that besides less people being run over.
By having the statistics as to who the target is.
I'm not saying that it's a bad ad, and you like it, and that's great, and you did very well, by the way. I think you have a second career. I'm just saying that if we, I just heard a presentation that talked about launching this in a big way in movies, not just on Armenian TV, but in other places. You're up for eyeballs against a lot of very slickly produced media. I come out of this world. This was my occupation. It's something I know a bit about. And all I'm saying is that if you're going to do that and spend the resources and spend the time and really go to the movie theaters and ask them to give you that valuable time, it behooves us to make sure that we're doing the best, that we know who we're targeting, we know how to target them, we know how to measure results. I'm not sure I'm seeing that part of this campaign. We did an ad that we think looks nice. We wrote it in-house. We have our in-house stars and talent performing in it and doing a great job. You put that up at the Americana, what response do you think you're going to get? I don't know. All I'm saying is that there are companies out there that maybe would help us for nothing or for little, but it's worth us, given the amount of resources we're putting into this, that we're looking to put it in places where people are normally spending tens of thousands of dollars to get that space. Leverage that. If we really think we can get that, do a little bit of legwork and see if we can get some professional help. Look, they've been trying this forever with cigarettes. They've been trying it forever with obesity. You see how sophisticated some of that messaging is and how targeted it is. If we really want to make a difference and not just pat ourselves on the back, if you're going to run an ad campaign, run an ad campaign. Otherwise, I just think that you may be wasting your time. Yes. This is an endemic problem that's very important to our city. We're spending a lot of resources and a lot of money in a lot of areas. And I think that doing an in-house PSA, it's great if you're running it, you have some ad time on Armenian TV, you put it on our television, but when you start talking about really bringing this wide and trying to do a big campaign, you're kind of in a different arena. And,
If you guys love that PSA and you think that's the best that we can do, so be it. I just think that, we should be really having, if we really want to do ads, we should have a professional look at it. It's not an easy thing to do.
Okay. Thank you. And just, Ms. Devine, I'll go to you in just a second. It's not a matter of loving the ad. The police identified, they had to identify what the target groups are, who's being impacted the most, who needs the most education, and then the resources had to be allocated in that direction. And that's what happened. It's not a matter of liking or not liking the ad.
Should it be in Armenian? Because I was wondering that. Is there one?
Of course, it was made in Armenian.
Oh, it was? Okay.
It was circulated in both languages. Yes, Ms. Devine.
First, I want to start out by thanking everybody that was involved in this process. I know you worked really hard. I did attend one of the task force meetings. I saw all of the people there. The police were there. A lot of good input. I think the report is great. I just had a couple of kind of comments to make and suggestions to make, and I was going to start with another point, but I'm going to piggyback on this PSA. My take on that is this. We have a program, or have had a program in our schools called Every 15 Minutes, which teaches young people about the consequences of drunk driving. I think we have to go in our PSAs from this soft core to a hard core, show people what can happen. This can be you if you cross on a red light, and show them. We just saw it on TV all over. Every channel we turned on was the woman getting hit on Broadway and the driver taking off. That made an impact. Everybody was talking about that. That's educational. That's informative. It's shocking, but I think if we make these PSAs graphic so that they have an impact. We did the same thing with seatbelts. I remember when seatbelts, they wanted everybody to wear seatbelts, and we said, oh, we're not doing that. I saw a film with a crash, and I have to tell you, from that day forward, I have worn a seatbelt every single time I get into my car. So I think it's really important to have our PSAs that we do make be more graphic, so that they are more powerful and they do make a greater impact on our citizens. And I think if we do show those, I went to one of the police educational presentations at Adventist, and it was very good. It was very good, and the seniors that were there responded to it, asked good questions. However, I think we also have to add a component to that of something more graphic so that we get our point across. Show a jogger running into the street. That's what we just had. 25 years old. She ran into the street, didn't look, and was hit, struck, and killed. We can show that in a taste but graphic way. This is what can happen to you if you don't obey the laws. So that's my take on the PSAs. The other two things about the report that I noted was there was no mention of lighting in the crosswalks. And I noticed in your report today, you did mention that you're going to have those flashing yield signs. I'd like to see more lighting on our crosswalks. A lot of our accidents happen at night because our crosswalks are not well lit. And I think that's really important. You can drive down at night on Louise or any of these other streets that have crosswalks, and people will just walk. People do not watch. The drivers have to be on the defensive, but I think if we have more lighting, pedestrians will watch, and we will watch as well. I know Councilwoman Friedman mentioned stop signs and how we don't want those. We have raceways in our community, or more stop signs. We have raceways. We have Kenneth Road. We have Chevy Chase. We have Glen Oaks Boulevard. All are raceways. I walk those streets. I know what happens. We don't have enough police to be there 24/7 to enforce our speeding violations. So I say, can we do a study? Can we look at those busy streets that have big expanses? What happens is there are huge expanses where there are no stop signs. And after people stop at one, then they speed to the next one. Well, if we can stop that by just a stop sign, I think it's worth a look. And finally, I'd like to see a timeline on these recommendations and the implementation of these. You know, we're still having pedestrians killed, and I think we need to address a lot of this immediately. Understanding from this that you already are working on a lot of it, and I think that's terrific, but it will do no purpose to us, I think, to just note and file this report. I think we need to have a report come back to us periodically, maybe in 2 weeks, on a timeline, and then after that, as you say here, you're going to be reporting back maybe once a month, every 2 months, so that we know exactly where we are in this. And that concludes my comments. Thank you so much for the report. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Ms. Devine. Yes, Mr. Weaver.
Well, you all know I've lived here all my life. Over the last 20, 30 years, I've watched traffic problems and accidents increase dramatically every decade to where it is now. I understand traffic engineering, and I wish you the very best in these initial improvements. I'm pessimistic by nature, I guess, and I have my own opinions, and that's just me, my opinions. We are not going to solve this problem. The people I see breaking the law, for one, are not in elementary school, they're not in middle school, and they're not in high school unless they're a senior and get a learner's permit and then get a license. The ones I see driving around are in their 20s and 30s. Those are the ones speeding like blue blazes, cutting corners, running red lights. And I'll guarantee you, none of them are watching channels, our TV channel. They're not reading the news press. They're not going to any community meetings. The people that go to the community meetings are the conscientious people that want to follow the laws. 194,000 people here. There's too many people that don't give a blank about how they drive. And they'll continue to. You can build all the traffic bump outs, circles, everything. We've talked about this for a decade up here while I've been sitting here. We haven't solved yet. You want to put more lights in? How much does a street light cost, approximately, Mr. Melania?
Councilmember Weaver, each standard costs around $25,000 to $30,000.
For one street light. You know, it just isn't going to. It's not going to happen. We have these wide streets where you're permitted to go 40 to 45 based on 80 percentile rankings by the state. They're usually 4 lanes wide. I know up on Honolulu where my grandson goes to school, my daughter telling me, it's scary. She can hardly get out of her car because cars are racing on there. You can't put speed bumps in, not on that. There's a lot of streets you can't put speed bumps on because the fire department has travel lanes that got to go. And if you put a speed bump where you can go 45 miles an hour, the cars are sailing. It ain't going to work. Bump outs, circles, maybe if it's wide enough to do a circle, that'll slow. But these things are going to happen. People are creatures of habit. 2 of the latest ones I'm seeing is at stoplights. Between the changing of the signal, cross traffic is going, light changes to red. It's changing to green. Got a split second there. Those stopping, they decide they're going to cut and beat the cars coming straight ahead. And I've seen almost accidents from doing that, time and again. Coming back from lunch, I'm driving up Isabel. I'm driving east on Wilson, and I get to Isabel. The light changes. I can't go because it's a red light. Here comes a middle-aged woman walking down from Ralph's. Red light, she just saunters across the other side because she didn't see a car, so that means I can go. Now, where's the education going to help? She's not watching Channel 6. She's not reading the press. She's not going to these community meetings. How are you going to reach her? It's too typical. There's too many people that don't care. So you can do all the PSAs you want, cheap, expensive, whatever, but you're not reaching the people that are breaking the law. They don't watch Channel 6. They don't read the news press. They don't go to community meetings. And like I said, it's not the kids in school. College age, yeah, could be. But it's light enough during the day that I can see in the car who's driving. And they're usually in their 20s and 30s, a lot of times with blackout windows. And they're hightailing it. How are you going to educate them? You're not. I know I'm redundant, I go around. It's interesting to note the heavy incident of accidents in the most populous area of Glendale, which is one of the most congested in the United States of America. I don't know what the solution is. Let's try what you're doing. Let's hope it makes a dent. Maybe we get some good feedback in the case we can try it in other locations. But that all depends on the geometry of the streets that you're in. Until then, go forth.
Thank you. Mr. Najarian?
Thank you. I think overall this is a good report to council. However, I do have to take issue with several items. And let's start with the overview. Someone picking up this broadcast or this handout may be led to believe that our efforts at pedestrian safety started October 28th, 2013. And we know that's not true. In fact, I myself have been involved in pedestrian safety with the city for longer even than Mr. Weaver has been on council. I think running for council was just a glimmer in his eye.
What
and that's
year
when
was that?
1996. When
I was already running. I already ran twice.
I stand corrected.
You're welcome.
You got it right, though, after that. And that's at the Transportation and Parking Commission. And it was during those years, Kerry Morford was the Director of Public Works, that we developed the Traffic Calming Toolkit, which was a series of engineering devices and engineering programs which would help slow vehicles down. And many of them are in use today still. The bulb outs that you're talking about, the striping to make the roads appear more narrow to slow vehicles down. Of course, the ever popular speed humps, which morphed into the speed lumps and speed humps. And we had the cut-through channels for the emergency vehicles to come through. Also the signalized crosswalks, the disco light crosswalks. That all started 20 years ago. So the city and council and its representatives on the commissions have been working hard on this throughout. You forgot to mention in 2009, we had a very high-level meeting with the California Berkeley representatives and the State Office of Traffic Safety. It was a 2-day seminar where they actually, as pedestrians, walked our city. In fact, they walked the campus and its surrounding streets and made comments. And then they spoke to our police professionals and our engineering staff and public works staff, and they came up with ideas. That was in 2009, and those were many of those changes were incorporated. In fact, they came back again, and I'm not sure if they were part of this pedestrian safety traffic force, but they did come back again. And I do want to tell you that I had a discussion with the head of that organization, Jill Cooper, and I said, obviously, Jill, we're still having these problems. What's your advice? And she spoke very highly of Glendale's efforts. So let it not be believed that Glendale is not doing a lot, and they're doing it to the satisfaction of the pedestrian and traffic safety experts. Clearly, we still have 8 too many fatalities. What's this year's count?
It's 5 right now.
Councilmember Najarian, it's up to 5, yeah.
Still, 5 is 5 too many. But they were impressed. So let it not be seen that this is just something lightly that we're getting involved in. I think every level of the city, from police, engineering, public works, executive staff, council, commissions, et cetera, really have been trying to solve this problem. But as Mr. Weaver said, it is a tough problem to solve, and there are so many components to it. There's driver education, there's pedestrian education, and I see those pedestrians every day that jump out and they think they can make the crosswalk, and clearly someone who's trying to get on the freeway, who wants to make that left turn because there's no oncoming traffic, and usually there is, maybe is traveling a little too quickly, and there's that person crossing against the light. Even in those situations, we have problems. And I have a couple ideas. Number one, in terms of funding, and funding's always an issue. Let's make sure that, aside from the Measure R money that we have, that we make every effort to apply for the grants through Metro. I think one of the, I guess, most popular areas of transportation funding now is this, they call it the first mile, last mile, the active transportation. So these sort of improvements that we can do, at least the engineering improvements, the hardware that we're all talking about, may be very appropriate and successful candidates for some of that funding. And to the extent that it floats up through Metro, I mean, God knows I'll do whatever I can to try and get a lot of it funding. Another idea that I have is the citation system. And currently when we write a citation for a speeder, for a distracted driver, unsafe lane change, all those other things, running a red light, we're citing them under the California Vehicle Code. And the vast majority of those funds of the fine end up going either to the state or to the county or to the courts. It's my understanding that if there's a citation based on a local code, on a municipal code, that we are able to retain a much larger percentage of those fines. So my suggestion is that we develop several, I'm not talking about rewriting the vehicle code, but we develop several appropriate codes tailor-made for Glendale that we ask our officers to cite. And when that fine is paid, we obtain a much larger share of the funding, and we funnel that money back into everything that we're trying to fund here, the engineering, the education, and the enforcement. So that's a thought. As far as Allstate goes, please, I mean, if anyone ever was trying to make a self-serving report, it's Allstate. Guess what Allstate bases its premiums on for its insurance? Oh, the traffic, the level of traffic accidents and the safety of the drivers and the ability of drivers in a particular neighborhood or zip code or precinct. And it is extremely self-serving. I don't trust Allstate 1 minute. However, let's give Allstate the benefit of a doubt. I suggest we write a letter to Allstate and ask them for funds to help improve the traffic situation in Glendale, whether it's a specific type of signalized crosswalk, whether it's traffic signals, whether it's the extra lighting that's going to make things safer. Let's put the burden on them. It's easy for them just to say, oh, Glendale, you're the second worst. Okay, Allstate. Big Allstate, by the way. Very successful, very profitable, very large nationwide. In fact, they cover several different industries. It's not just insurance. Let's ask them, thanks for pointing out how unsafe we are. By the way, here's 5 intersections we'd like you to help us improve. Here's the bill. You want to have a ribbon cutting and bring all that other PR junk that you guys are interested in? We'll let you do that. But help us out. Put your money where your mouth is on this sort of thing. So that's just, I mean, we have to think out of the box on these things. Those last 2 ideas were a little bit out there. But I think it's some of those out there ideas that can come to fruition and help us solve this problem.
Yes, Ms. Friedman.
Well, first, I'm glad that we're having this very lively discussion. It's an issue that deserves it, if there ever was one. And to hear so many ideas is really wonderful. First, I want to say that I completely agree with Mr. Najarian and Mr. Weaver, particularly Mr. Weaver's points about what we can do and what we can't do. And I think people need to keep that in mind. I believe that the things that we can do, for the most part, we are trying to do, and we've been doing, as Mr. Najarian said, for quite a long time. It's been building, and I know Mr. Najarian in particular has taken this on as really a project of his and taken it to heart. But when it comes to changing behavior, it's very difficult, and Mr. Weaver's absolutely right that we have drivers that have. Now, first of all, let me say not everyone. I mean, I drive around and there are a lot of very responsible, very good drivers in the city. In fact, I would say it's the vast majority. But there are definitely some drivers that have a lack of respect, a lack of paying attention, and a lack of patience sometimes, and it shows. And no matter what we do, if you can't conquer that, there's no way you can engineer past those things. You just can't. You can only do so much. And to Ms. Devine, it's not that I don't like stop signs. They have their place. But I can tell you from personal experience and from looking at the data that some of the most dangerous places we have in the city are intersections with stop signs. All you have to do is go through the intersection of Pacific and Kenneth, which I do every day, to see the number of people running stop signs. I mean, it's a frightening place to be at times. And they are not effective in terms of traffic calming necessarily. And there are other things that can be a lot more effective. But it's changing those attitudes, and how do we do that? And I really don't know. And that's why I gave the PSA such a hard time, because you can hear the different opinions about what it should contain, and that's why I think if we're going to do it at all, and I'm not even sure we should, let's have some professionals look at it, because there are so many choices, whether you do something more graphic, you do something that's targeted to different groups. I believe that even though the elementary school kids aren't driving, they're the drivers of tomorrow. So my hope is that if you start with them now and instilling that behavior, maybe you can overcome some of those issues we have with our drivers. But if this is going to work, if we're really going to solve our traffic safety problems, it's something that everyone in the community has to take on as their own personal project, because it begins with every single driver and every single pedestrian. And government can only do so much. We can engineer the best we can engineer. We can make it as conducive as we can to walking and biking, which has been a personal project of mine over the past several years. And certainly the more people out of the cars, the better. The less cars we have on the streets. By the way, we're not the most congested city in the country. We're not even the most congested city in Los Angeles County. But we have, it's a growing area, and we have a lot more cars than we did 30, 40 years ago. But everyone has to take it on as a personal project, every single person, with yourself and your children. And that's going to mean that it has to become a community-wide effort. And I will say this, as much as Mr. Weaver is a pessimist, I see really for the first time in the past few years the tide changing in terms of community attitude. It wasn't as much of an issue 5, 6 years ago to the average person, and now I think to the average person in Glendale, it's probably one of, if not the biggest issue. And as that awareness that it's a big issue becomes more out there in the community, that's when I think we will start to see some of the behaviors change. So I'm hoping, I'm not as much of a pessimist. I think that we've, as a council, have worked on this for many years. The police department has worked on it for many years, but now I start to see the community really working on it themselves. So I will end there.
Thank you. If I can just say one more thing. All I want to say is
Devine.
We should add one more E, and that is encourage attitude change, to educate, enforce, and engineer. Encourage attitude change.
Okay, thank you.
I have one more E.
Oh, no.
Eviscerate those people that ignore the stop signs and hit people in the intersection. Eviscerate.
Mr. Mayor,
After you identify them, right?
Hopefully, identify them.
As opposed to sort of random.
No, you have to catch them.
and with that note, Mr. Mayor, may I move to...
Well, I'd like to say a few words.
Oh, I thought you had. I'm
no,
sorry.
I actually hadn't. So there's a motion. That's fine. So motion's on the record. I want to ask Mr. Golanyan, and I know that there's clearly a certain methodology. So the comparison in comparison between Burbank, Glendale, and Pasadena, that's done per accident or per capita? Is it adjusted to density? I mean, how is that done?
Mr. Mayor, I'm going to invite Lieutenant Bracken or Chief Castro to respond to that question, if I may.
Mayor and City Council, we had Abby, our crime analyst, look at this morning. Obviously, this is something that we're always looking at, but these are compiled through the Office of Traffic Safety.
Okay.
Unfortunately, we're only able to go through 2011. The statistics are difficult for them to compile in a certain amount of time and get us up to date. So unfortunately, it's only through 2011. So the particular statistics that they're looking at, they're comparing against population density.
Okay.
And they're also comparing against miles driven by individuals. So they're comparing those two statistics within that particular year.
Okay. But it's an apples to apples comparison as opposed to a watermelon to an apple.
Correct.
Yes. Okay. Thank you. That's all the question I had. And then I want to ask the chief. Chief, last year when we were experiencing, you just came on board and it was like the worst time because it seemed like we were experiencing a fatality every month or so. And I remember I had a personal meeting with you. I don't know if other council members had one also. And I said, Chief, what are we going to do? What do we do about this? What's the plan of action? And to me, it seemed like the most logical thing. One of the things was that you identify, you said we're identifying the geographic areas where this tends to happen. We're identifying the demographic groups that tends. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yes. When I did come in, we were looking at that. We did an in-depth analysis to try to figure out how could we quickly identify our target audience that we needed to reach out to begin immediate actions, knowing that we had long-term planning going on for this. I can tell you, this is something that's a national problem. Last month I had an opportunity to meet with leaders and chiefs from other major cities at San Francisco to talk about this very issue. So what we did is we looked at that. Where are our target audience? And we found out it was seniors of American Armenian descent who were predominantly pedestrians who were being victims of fatal collisions. And that's why we targeted that audience. We then reached out to that demographic. We went to the leaders in the Glendale Armenian community and said, this is our target audience. And I wanted to be very upfront with them because I'm saying I'm not putting this out there to create any type of stereotype or any other negative connotation to a particular group, a large part of our community. But I said, this is a reality and this is to save lives. From those meetings, we said, how can we reach this group quickly? And the information I received from the leadership in the community, religious leaders, business leaders, community leaders, was a lot of them watch Armenian TV. And we have a lot of shows that are produced locally as well as in Glendale. And we reached out. How many shows did we get to play?
Different shows, 29 shows, probably 4 times over.
So we found that as an immediate reach to reach that group. We also looked at the wristbands, knowing that a lot of these individuals dress in a way that was not very conducive to a jogger that wears, Nike outfits that have built-in reflective materials. So we found that as a way to get that message out. So those were some of the things. This is a long-term solution. We are going to use many different tools. And like any tools that you have, sometimes the hammer works today, but it won't work tomorrow. We're going to try different things. The educational component, the engineering component, all of those have to be continuous efforts in trying different ways that we can reach out. And sometimes things will work, sometimes they won't. But we identified our target, we identified the locations. Lieutenant Bracken and his traffic unit has been going out and doing very targeted surgical type of enforcement efforts. So the areas where we see the largest number of pedestrian disobedience to the law, we do our pedestrian stings. Where we find the largest number of traffic violations, we do our traffic stings. And we do a combination of education as well as enforcement. We recently received a number of coupons from 7-Eleven that we could hand out to kids and drivers that are doing things right, so that they would go out and say, we're not just here to enforce it. When we see positive behaviors, we also reward that. And all of this is to create a discussion, to keep this at the very forefront. Our campaign will also be additional education. We worked with Sunrise Rotary to put the banners up on Brand. It's just constant, and you've been to many of those meetings with me as we speak and get unified. You saw in our local press even, is now the tide is starting to turn to say this is not a government alone solution. This is a community solution, and as it took many years to get a 90% compliance rate on seatbelts, it took many years to get a reduction in the use of tobacco, it took many years to get a reduction in the number of drunk drivers on our roads. This area of the next component of protecting our community with traffic, pedestrian, and bicycles all coexisting is going to be a long-term and consistent effort, and it's going to take a lot of different efforts. We've had very positive outreach. You know, the hospitals are working with us, the churches are working with us, the senior groups, and it's all departments, the library. We go out to the parks and we meet with individuals who visit our pocket parks and play games there, and again, have these discussions about when you're walking, look for these type of things, look at these type of activities. And even though we still are having an unacceptable number of fatal collisions, we are starting to see some glimmer of behavioral changes. And it's going to take a long and consistent effort. This is going to be a marathon, not a sprint, in order to get the results that we're looking for. And other communities are looking to us because Glendale has had this issue for many, many years. And as our community changes, as we see progress, this will continue to be an area that we need to, as we look at everything that we're doing, how else can we continue to reach out? But I can tell you this, I'm very pleased with the community's response. Every group that I've met with and asked for their help has absolutely said, we'll give you what we can. We are willing to be a partner in helping to find this solution for this community.
Yes, Ms. Friedman.
Well, first, I really appreciate your holistic and community-based approach because it's definitely what's needed here. So good job with that. I have a question. We hear a lot from people that we're not doing enough in terms of enforcement. We get requests from streets all over Glendale for officers stationed on their streets to deal with speeders. We have speeding issues all over Glendale. Can you speak to that? Are we doing enough enforcement? Do you need more officers? Do you think it's effective to do it the way you're doing and moving it around? How do you see the enforcement piece of the puzzle fitting in? Do we have, I mean, we don't control the fines, right? We can't say we're just going to take anyone's car who's caught speeding. We can't give them a $700 ticket. You know, are we limited in terms of that? Maybe you can just give some analysis in terms of how you see the enforcement side of the equation.
Enough enforcement to measure what enough enforcement is somewhat difficult. The perception of the community is one thing, but we do a lot of enforcement. I was getting a little concerned that we were almost doing too much. They have something that's called the traffic index. When you look at the number of citations you write versus the number of drivers and accidents that you have, and we're running right in the middle. We're not victimizing our drivers, but we're not also lenient on it. We do a lot of enforcement. We have some statistics. We've written over 3,000 citations in the last 2 months. That's a lot. Our traffic officers are working hard. Some areas we can improve upon, but what we do is every week we look at the accident rate for the previous week. We identify those locations, and that's what they're doing. We get a lot of requests. One thing we are looking at doing is streamlining the way that we take in requests. Right now, a lot of them come in from phone calls or emails. We want to create a way where people can kind of get all the information, and then what we do is we look at that and we say, is that the priority based on the statistical data that we have right now? And sometimes it's a matter of sending out a volunteer or a traffic officer to just go and look at an area. We do use our mobile radar trailers. Those record speeds, the high, the low, the times, so we can take that out. And even though it's a visual deterrent, so it couldn't skew the data, sometimes we use them without any radar so that we can really, someone will say, there's speeders all the time on my street, it's, this and that, but it doesn't always bear out to be that. And so we have to look and pick and choose where are we going to apply our efforts. But I think to answer your question, we are doing a balance. I don't want to do so much enforcement we victimize. But one of the things we also look at is we look at the drivers, because we looked at the drivers that were causing accidents and how many of them are Glendale residents and how many are visitors to our community. So we probably take a little more aggressive approach for visitors because they're not going to be living here, but if they're visiting or working here, they probably will get less of a break than a resident that says, I get it, I made a mistake, I understand what you're trying to do here.
Thank you, Chief. And I really, this is very important information so that all of us and our residents understand that this is all being done in a scientific manner. I mean, we're not just throwing this, spaghetti on the wall hoping that it's going to stick. We're looking at information. We're all equally frustrated, I believe, all of us, this council, the staff, the police department, in our inability to eradicate this problem, because that's what we want. We want this to just stop happening. And I don't know whether that's realistic or not. But what we can do, and what the police department is doing, and what our city engineering is doing, is looking at the problem, identifying the causes of the problem, and doing our best to address it. And again, I mean, this is going to be a long-term solution. I wasn't here in the 1950s. I haven't been championing this since then. But since day one that I've gotten on council, that this has been a very important issue for me. I do remember the specific conversation about the balance between enforcement and education. We've sort of approached the boundary beyond which there's a diminishing return from increased enforcement. In fact, there may be some negative impact from that. So again, short of me having independent engineering expertise or police expertise, I have to rely on your efforts and encourage you to continue doing the good job that you're doing, and rely on us to do our part to make this better. And hopefully public transportation improves to such a degree in Glendale, and we do someday have a subway station here, or something, some kind of, something that's going to really lighten the load, and we, our residents don't rely so much on driving, and we have a more increasing culture of pedestrianism and riding bicycles. But before we get to that point, and until we get to that point, this is a real issue that needs to be handled real way today. And that's what we're all doing. I commend you for doing it. Please continue keeping us updated, and make whatever adjustments to your perceived process that you need to make. Councilmember Devine has a very good idea that I support. When you bring this report back to us next time, let's have it in the evening so that our residents are also, it's a lot of people just aren't engaged in these afternoon hours because they're working. So let's make sure they all know what we're doing to tackle this very, very serious problem that I think we all share our concern about. So
it's absolutely a problem that we have total control over. We have control over the way that we drive, the way that we walk, and the way that we ride bikes in our community. So this is a community problem that we can change. Some other crime aspects are much more difficult to resolve, but this is one that can be affected, but it does. It takes an absolute community effort to do it, all the different stakeholders in the community. And so far, everybody's reaching out. It is going to be a sustained and long marathon to get there.
Thank you. And I want to make sure to close the public hearing. We have a motion.
Second.
Can we have a roll call, please?
Council members Devine?
Well, I would like to see a timeline, but since this motion is on the docket, I'll just approve. Yes.
Friedman?
Yes.
Najarian?
Yes.
Weaver?
Aye.
Mayor Sinanian?
Yes. And next is adjournment.
To adjourn?
Second.
We're adjourned at 4:16 p.m.